And the hybrid European living off our virtues or colonization is what? He been doing what? Come in your house like a Trojan horse and been stealing all your resources, then killing off your family, taking your stuff. That's what it is.
Okay. Listen, we're not going to go into another lesson because we have been in the midst of the master. I hope you all notice our new sign behind him, thinking of a master plan. You didn't even notice that.
Oh, you got some stuff.
Thinking of a master plan. You always doing that. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for your support. Please make sure you either go to our Cash App or to our PayPal and support House of Reawakening Minds, because we are always here to support you. We love you. We appreciate you. And we ask that you have a very pleasant evening. Don't let grand evening. Don't let all of the I know it sounds a little down sometimes when you get to but there's brighter days are coming. It depends on you.
Yeah, and we have to be honest with our people, because we don't want to project false hopes.
True.
However, we also want to project to ourselves our responsibility in that we are creators and makers of our condition.
Absolutely.
And the sooner we start taking responsibility, the sooner we can help fix things. And we've got to get out of that paradigm of looking for sacrificial lambs.
And I want to say the one last thing. I want to say this. I had an example of this. You remember yesterday. When we think in terms of working with fiat versus the other forms, the barter system came up yesterday. You remember? So yesterday I had a situation where I had to go to a new person to get my locks done, right? And so I had a product with me when I went there to visit. When I went there to get my locks done, and he told me, he said, well, come back tomorrow and I will purchase what you have, which is the air purifier. And I thought about it I said, okay. When I got home, I thought about, wait a minute, that is two hair lock sessions.
Yeah.
So I called him up. I said, instead of you paying me for this, just put it on the books for the next two sessions. I'm going to bring you that. We have to learn how to barter and trade. And when you think in terms of it, we all have different things that we have to offer.
Now,
it hit home.
The fake and the fraudulent income was applied to your right of trade to rob you. That's why Wall Street is wealthy. They've been stealing. And the people think they're obligated to that.
Anyway, we can go on. Thank you so much. Thank you for all of you who are texting in.
Declare your nationality.
Right, texting in.
For thousands of years, among other nations coming from the old Moabite Canaanite peoples, pretty much expressed in what we know today as constitutional principles. Now, a lot of times when people look at constitution principles, they're usually because of the way that most people have been taught, their mind immediately goes to the Constitution for the United States operating at North America. But the concept and the principles of that Constitution supersede the operations of constructed government operating at Northwest Africa, i.e. Morocco, i.e. North America, Northwest of Mexico, in contemporary times under the United States Corporation Company operatives who have been pretty much occupying Morocco for the last couple of hundred years under colonial operations and under the doctrine of discovery set forth by the popes of Rome, etc. And while the constitutional principles come from Muslim law, i.e., and more specifically, the Anansi Moors, the Anansi Confederation, sometimes referred to by the people as the Iqua Moors or the Iqua Confederation. So the Constitution for the United States is derived from the ancient Moabite Canaanite rules and laws. However, it must also be remembered that when you were talking Constitution, we're not just talking the written documents that you know as a Constitution. We're also talking about the 12 signs of the zodiac. You're talking about the numbers from 0 to 9. And you're talking about geometry, etc., and cosmology, astrology, which comprises the Constitution of the ancient Canaanite Moabite nation, in modern times known as the Moorish nation. which pretty much has been what you call occupied under the hybrid Germanic tribes for the last few hundred years. But I want to mention a few more of the facts that need to be known, civic facts, in order to give you a concept of change of frame of mind for most of the people, which is needed for the liberation of humanity from the dark side priesthood, who have been pretty much governing the planet for quite some time now. Keep in mind, it is not only the restoration, the need for the restoration of the culture and traditions of the ancient Moors among the Aboriginal peoples, relative to cosmology and the mathematical study of self and of nature, etc., which constitutes the culture, etc. But to understand the necessity for people to start intelligently and with knowledge, not with emotions, governing themselves, due to the fact that there has been this misconception that the persons who have been operating government on the land at North America under the guise of the United States federal government, etc., being a de facto and foreign order, due to the fact that it has caused so much injury and suffering to and among the people. Therefore, it is more important, as transitions are made in both consciousness and knowledge among the common people, and particularly among the people of the land, that we be better prepared for the changes that are taking place and the changes which must take place here on Midgard Earth. So I want to make a couple of more notes, and I suggest that you take cognizance of these notes, and then we'll go even into more detail of our discussion tonight. Fact: the King of England financially backed both sides of the conflict in the American Revolutionary War. And for your reference, you will see the Treaty of Versailles, July the 16th of 1782, and the Treaty of Peace 8, Statute 80. And as we mentioned the couple of weeks ago, and in between, we've had some people call and some people contact me even, off the show in relationship to this one, which we had mentioned then. You cannot use the United States Constitution to defend yourself because you are not a party to it. And for that, you see Paddleford Fay and Company versus the mayor and alderman of the city of Savannah, Georgia, 438, 520. Again, America is the name of a major continent among the 7 recognized continents. The United States Corporation doing business at North America is a British colony. The United States is a corporation. It is not a landmass. It existed before the Revolutionary War, and the British troops did not leave North America until 1796. That's a fact, and is more established information for you to recognize that the concepts that the people have in general, that these persons who they've been thinking was a legitimate Congress and Senate operating on the land, thinking that they were actually constitutional officers, but yet in their experiences discovering that these people were doing more things to harm the people, doing more things to unlawfully tax the people, doing more things to unlawfully and oppressively regulate the people, doing more things to force taxation on the people, force drugs on the people, force contracts on the people with private corporations, and force the people to pay taxes for them to send into so-called other countries under the guise of foreign aid, while they were actually setting up private personal funds for themselves in other political nation states under the guise of having authority under the Constitution, when in fact they were not. They were actually operating as foreign agents and foreign operatives, and the so-called lobbyists have been and still are used as a cover for their criminality of stealing funds from the common people of America. That's both the nationals, i.e. the people of the land, and the U.S. corporate citizens who are members of their private foreign corporation operations, etc., and then sending it to other nations to the tune of billions, multiple billions of alleged dollars a year, and then claiming those debts to be on the backs of the people of the land, etc. And they have been getting away with it because people don't know that these operatives are actually criminals, and that they're really trustees for the British colony. So the concepts that the people think that the so-called United States is an independent country was false and still is false. It's a British colony. That's a fact. Now, we know that the people have been going through a lot of pressure from the Whigmore Party split operatives, known as the Conscience Whigs and the Cotton Whigs, commonly known in these contemporary times as the Republican Party and the Ku Klux Klan Democratic Party. That is specifically the Republican Party operating on the land at North America is the split off of the Whigmore Party, known as the Cotton Whigs, and the Ku Klux Klan Democracy Democrats is known as the Cotton Whigs. I apologize, and the Republican Party is the Conscience Whigs. And people need to know what they're really arguing about, because what they're really arguing about is really two-body politics of foreign operatives known as Zionists. They are, in fact, Zionists. It has nothing to do with what you like or what you do not like. And they have not been operating in the cares or the concerns of the people, but have been operating in cares and concerns of the Queen of England, answering to the Circle Church and the Chancery on Fleet Street, England, i.e. the Bar Association, and then answering to the Popes of Rome and the Bishoprics of Rome under the Treaty of Verona, etc., with the determined interest and determined mission to overthrow the Republic, which is why you always hear them saying, whether they're from the Conscience Whigs or from the Cotton Whigs, always saying, quote unquote, relative to themselves, quote unquote, our democracy. And that is the code word for the British colony trustees, etc., that these people are arguing over who they're going to vote for or not vote for, not knowing that these people are signed, and the fiction that these people's voices are heard or that they have free speech is all based in fraud.
A couple questions have come up.
Mm-hmm.
One question is from Ami. And the question is, both factions are Zionists?
Exactly. See, you know what? Take this in consideration and then ask that question again, because I want to give them something to think about. I'm not going to expand on this, but take this statement and analyze this and talk about this off the show. Our people have been arguing for generations to get off the plantation. Is that not true? Now that the Cotton Whigs, the people have been thrown off the plantations, i.e. their jobs, long O, short O, job jobs, and the trick is to get them to beg for their jobs back. Now they're begging to get back on the plantation. Just take that in consideration. So we won't go deeper into that, but give a thought on that. Now, ask that question again.
The same question?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just want to throw that in to give them something to think about. They want to get off the plantation. Now they're begging The trap is for them to beg to get back on it. See, no one's talking about the restoration of their estate. You see the whole point? No one's talking about decolonization, which is really what their economic problem is. They're asking to get back on the plantation. See, they're making them suffer to get the people to ask to get back on the plantation so they can justify further corruption.
So the question was, both factions are Zionists?
Exactly. Keep this in mind. So write this down and do a little research, you all. The Whittemore Party, and do some research on the convention, 1854, etc., to 1863, Knights of Columbus, Ku Klux Klan oath, etc., and Horace Greeley, the New York newspaper tycoon, and his association with the Whittemore Party, and this convention of 1854 at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and also the split of the Whittemore Party, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the split being the Conscience Whigs, Republican Party, and the Cotton Whigs, i.e. the Ku Klux Klan, Democratic Party, two sides of the same coin who have been taking over, surreptitiously and via misprision, i.e. with the missionary operations of overthrowing the republic, and thus, under a color of authority and a color of law, instituted de facto governance on the land under the guise of the United States Corporation Company being falsely taught as a country, when it's actually a private human trafficking corporation. That's a fact. All right. Was there another one?
What someone said, what about Trump?
Trump is better than all of them wrapped together. He's still a Zionist. Remember, I always say to people, and we've been saying this for the last couple of years, Donald John Trump has an assignment. And I suggest if anyone knows differently, to give note to it for the public record. But this is the fact. Donald John Trump is assigned to clean up, whether it was his intentions or not. I'm not arguing that. He's assigned to clean up much of the corruption that has contaminated the rogue state, corporate state that has been feigning as a country for these last couple hundred years, known as the United States, which is known by the nations of the world now as a rogue state who's been using military operations, biological warfare, financial warfare, genocide, assassination, murder, etc., to enforce their secret Treaty of Verona and other operations under the doctrine of discovery. And his job is to clean up some of it to prove worthy that the nations of the earth will continue in the future to trade with them. While the United States Corporation, through their Zionist order, has been controlling artificially with private commercial paper known as Federal Reserve notes, etc., from the Zionist order known as the Federal Reserve, set forth by Woodrow Wilson on Jekyll Island, 1913, etc. Although the operations were instituted in actuality earlier than that, that's their official admission. It is to his job is to clean up some of the mess, or they're not going to trade with them anymore. This is another reason why the trade windows of the world have frozen. Another reason why the credit windows of the world have frozen. This whole game that they've been playing politically as of late is a cover-up for their criminality. So to that point, Donald Trump has more honor than the rest, and I'm not saying that to defend him. I just know part of what his mission is. And I suggest if any of you think that I'm lying, you can have Donald Trump himself call us, and I bet you he won't deny what I just said. Even if they don't discuss it publicly, I'm telling you the facts, and that's what's known. That's a fact. And I suggest you pay attention more to what they do than what they say. However, they're still arguing over our estate. Now, that's the truth.
And there was a request for you to repeat the stare decisis case that said we don't use the Constitution.
Oh, yes.
Defend,
Now, here we go. Now, this is a point 17 on this list of factual information shared with you all. And each one of these issues, we could give you more support, but we give you law cases so that you can look them up yourself, because we already know that whenever we come on the air at the House of Reawakening Minds, we already know that certain alphabet soup organizations and foreign agencies always put trolls out, whether they look like us or whether they're otherwise hybrid Europeans. And so we give you law cases so you can research for yourself. Accept not what we say, go do some research. Here we go. Number 17. You cannot use the United States Constitution to defend yourself, because you are not is emphasized, not a party to it. Now, as a case law, you can see Paddleford, Fay, and Company versus the mayor and aldermen of the city of Savannah, 14, Georgia, 438 and 520. Now, if you want me to expand on that a little bit, I'll expand on it a little bit in 2 points. That's number one, when you look at this in relationship to the city, the mayor and aldermen of the city of Savannah, you need to know what that's saying, because that's a party to the matter, right? Now, the city of Savannah is not what you would call Savannah City, as you would see. So when you see the city of, or the state of Georgia, or state of Pennsylvania, or state of Delaware, every time you see that state of, you're dealing with the foreign corporate operatives of the Jesuit order, of the Zionists, who own the Federal Reserve and own the United States Corporation Company, colonies, etc., and has nothing whatsoever to do with the Constitution for the United States derived from Muslim law, as Barack H. Obama had stated, etc., earlier in the last part of his presidency for the corporation. And so the people don't know that the Constitution of the United States is not the Constitution for the United States, and they're not aware of the Organic Act of Congress of 1871, February the 2nd, when the trustees and board of directors who have been claiming to be Congress and senators came out of the closet, but didn't tell the people that they actually overthrew the Constitution for the United States, i.e. the Republic, and instituted their democracy platform. And so the alteration of Constitution of the United States, by virtue of them tricking the people to be stock under the U.S. citizen clauses, declared the people to be stock, and said and held the position and still hold the position that the people have no constitutional rights whatsoever, can own no property whatsoever, cannot dispute any of the laws, rules, or orders set forth by the United States corporate company operatives, etc., and trustees. And thus, you cannot use the United States Constitution to defend yourself, because you're not a party to it. On another point, consider this. If you're not the original people of the land, i.e. the American nationals, etc., from which the principles of that Constitution is derived from the honor honesty, and if you're not direct descendants of the so-called founding fathers that they talk about, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, etc., Thomas Jefferson, etc., in harmony with the treaties and the Constitution, you're not a party to it. And you cannot claim to be one of the brand systems set up by the German Dutch masters, such as Negro, black, and colored people and Indians, etc., and use that Constitution because you're not a party to it. The treaties and that Constitution comes from Moors and a few hybrid European sons under agreements of trade and commerce. This is why you see in the early days the Almoroccan flag, i.e. the red flag with the 5-pointed green star, the continental flag, sometimes referred to as the treaty flag, i.e. the Bunker Hill flag, and you see a red flag with a green pine tree, cedar tree, in a white canton, and then you see the stars and stripes, which is a banner of amity and commerce, which is a trading banner, etc. If you're not coming under that or enforcing treaty and constitution, you're not a party to it. And if you're not a descendant, you're not a party to it. Therefore, you cannot use those agreements and those contracts as a defense. And this is, again, with why they do not teach the people civics, because they don't want the people to be obviously or become obviously, cognate of the fact that the persons who are really administrative operatives pretending to be judges, to recognize why they don't have constitutions posted on the doors of these so-called municipal courts, because they are not constitutional courts. They are not creatures of the constitutions, and the persons who are operating those venues are not Article 3 judges. They are indeed administrative executors under executive law, under corporate operations, and are indeed not judges whatsoever. And they don't want you to figure that out, and they don't want you to know that, while that also is established fact, and that's among the list that we're sharing with you, etc. And that's the basis upon which those multiple levels are the basis upon which you can't use that Constitution. And this is, again, why it's important for people to really study civics so they can recognize where they are in their position and status operating on their land, and also others who are operating on our land who claim to be U.S. citizens but are not harmonic with the Republic's Constitution, and wonder why they can't use that Constitution. They're not a party to it. All parties are specifically named and they must be identified. Same thing goes for reparations. Unfortunate truth, but it is. And we don't have to argue it, because every time you see the people keep trying to talk about reparations or restoration or anything like that, they're always what? Flatly ignored by the so-called representatives that they thought was their government.
Okay, Dominique Harris says, not being a party to the Constitution from a legal standpoint makes sense.
Legal or factual standpoint, yes.
But it is a trust indenture.
We know that it is.
DEC, the Declaration of Independence, form the trust of which you can place claim upon as progeny.
Oh, now you can say progeny, just like you can say heir, right? Mm-hmm. We can say progeny and we can say heir, right? Now, progeny of what nation state, what pedigree? See, because the parties specifically must be named, because that's the issue. As an example, let me give you an example. There's a treaty between the original legitimate creature officers for the United States Republic and Russia, as an example. If there's a controversy or an argument or any issue that must be addressed between the two so-called recognized nation states, if that's the case, and knowing that the United States is not, you will not see them saying America versus Russia, or Americans this or Americans that, or green people, or doesn't matter what color you are. You will have to name the political platform specifically in order to have a jurisdictional platform under a consular international venue to argue any issue, etc. If there's no treaty between any particular said nation states or political jurisdictions, therefore there would have to be a liaison of another nation state with which the identified parties have treaty, and that other nation state would therefore be a liaison between them, etc., if no treaty exists between them. Therefore, the principle that we're presenting is that all parties must be specifically named. You cannot designate just a status without the identified pedigree or nation state. It doesn't work. Meaning that if you're not the progeny, as an example, if you're not the progeny of the Moors, etc., you cannot use Moorish treaties to entertain your liberties, etc. If you're not a citizen or national of Russia, you can't use the Russian constitution as a defense. If you're not a national or citizen of China, you cannot use the Chinese constitutions or principal laws of liberty to secure your rights. That's common sense. One of the traps that we have been suffering from has been the false concepts that have been promoted under the artificial 14th Amendment operations of civil rights fiction that has been promoted at North America since the 1800s under the guise of liberating Moors of African descent who they had branded as Negroes and blacks under the pretext that they were going to get some rights. Have you noticed even to this day, none of those rights have been recognized? Everybody talks about them, but they still do what? Ritual murders on the street by the day. They have their communities are gentrified. The land of the people have been stolen over and over again in multiple municipal jurisdictions with no protections whatsoever. Women have been raped, murdered in jail, out of jail, on the streets, in their homes, etc. And then you have paid operatives marching these people around talking about U.S. citizens, and they haven't caught on yet that they've been played. They're not a party to the Constitution. They're not a party to the treaties. However, their forebears are, i.e., but their forebears are Moors, but they claim to be black. Therefore, black people have no rights because there's no such people. They never wrote a treaty or a constitution nowhere on the planet Earth. And there's no such place on the earth called Blackadonia, Negro Dinar, or Culadifia. Doesn't exist. Get over it and get real.
So, Carl, QL says, do Moors need the MSTOA to control governmental operation here in North America?
MSTOA is an organization or outreach organization to bring people back into the constitutional fold of government. That's its missionary work. However, within that structure, Noble Drew Ali did set up a governmental structure. The fact that it has not been operative is quite evident. And so do a little bit of research and answer that yourself. With an addition, I'll make this statement. Noble Drew Ali wrote a direct letter to be read before the temples inferring infiltration into the movement where people were trying to take over the movement and trying to dismiss him out of the movement. So he was already talking about infiltration by people who thought his position was just a joke, and then finding out from the nations of the earth, but they don't recognize the movement without him as the head. So when you talk about the great sellout, and then you're talking about enforcing international constitutional law, because keep in mind, I know that some of you are familiar where you hear this statement: come all ye Asiatics of North America and hear the truth about your nationality and your birthright. You are not Negro, black, colored, or Ethiopian. Come and link yourselves. Learn of your ancient mothers and fathers' ancient and divine creed. Come and link yourselves back with the families of nations. So clearly that's a civic statement indicating international venue, and an international venue relative to diversity of nationality, where any issues or controversies of land grants, etc., or international rights and liberties are concerned, is an international consular venue. That's a fact, i.e. in Article 3 platform on an international venue as described in Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution for the United States. coming off the treaties that superseded. That's a fact.
Just trying to see if there's any other questions that you need to address. Okay, James Todd says, how do you identify yourself between our Native American blood and Moorish blood, and which treaties do we use?
Well, it's very easily. The tag Native American was created in the 1930s by the occupational Europeans. There is no such thing as Native Americans, i.e. they're all Moors. Whether you talk about the Nanacoke, the Wachita, etc., the Nanakoki, the Mohican, etc., Seminole, Onondaga, etc., all of the different tribes, they are Canaanite, Moabite descent, and some from Sindh that you call India are Naga and Bantu. That's the fact. And collectively, you can call them all Phoenicians. There you go.
I don't know what this question means. This is, what about California?
From Khalifa, that's where you get Caliph from. From Khalifa. Queen Khalifa. You'll see, if you go in Khalifa land, you'll see they'll have all over California this Berber queen with dreads. And people be looking at it, but they're not told the history. Well, yeah, that's Khalifa's land, yes. Oh, you're home. Get over it, Dorothy.
Another question is, would you be able to utilize the Bill of Rights?
See, this is the point. The principles that are embodied in the Bill of Rights pre-exist the Bill of Rights as written in that Constitution. Keep in mind that these principles of that Constitution are already Muslim law that already exist. They're adopted by the hybrid Europeans to do business at Morocco. So the Constitution is adopted from Muslim law. But those principles already exist. It's not given by that Constitution. They already exist with you. You don't need to use that. You need to use your divine birthright and all treaties superseding that Constitution. The Constitution is just simply the obligation of them doing business on our land, which turns them back and reminds them of their obligations to the treaties, i.e., all debts and contracts, Article 6, Supremacy Clause. All debts and contracts entered into before the adoption of this Constitution are binding against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. And all treaties made or which shall be made under their authority, under the authority of the United States, shall be the quote-unquote supreme law of the land. And the judges of every state shall be bound thereby. And any laws or constitution to the contrary, of any states to the contrary, notwithstanding. So when you look at that Constitution, you're always thinking treaty, superseding it. So the Constitution pushes them back to their obligations to you in the first place. Why do you think that most of the politicians don't honor the Constitution? Why do you think the magistrates, the administrative executives claiming to be judges get upset as soon as someone talks about the Constitution? Because they are anti-Constitution, i.e. anti-treaty.
Someone just clarified and said that they were talking about reparations in California.
I know they talk about it in a lot of places. Now, let's deal with this. Reparations, and this is very important. Reparations specifically is the venue operations in international law, whereas one or more specific nation states specifically identified are charged on an international venue, i.e. international court of law, as an aggressor or party that created an injury on another specified and identified nation state, etc., with all claims specifically listed and given support or factual supports, etc. So specifically, an identified specific nation or nations being by law commanded to repair and to restore injuries done to another specifically named and identified people slash nation, etc., as remedy. That's called reparations. And I suggest you all go into your law books and look at it. And so when you start coming talking about people of color and the green nation, and it doesn't matter what color you are, nation was injured by some other, doesn't matter what color you are, nation, that stuff is not going to work. The other thing I would suggest that many of you do, look into some of the incidents that took place at the United Nations. And one of the interesting things was, and you all look this up, when Ralph Bunche went before the United States talking about Negroes and rights, etc., and then a lot of the representatives of nations, quote unquote, I repeat, nations got up and walked out because he was insulting them, as if he, being a Mason, just like most of them, didn't know that these people ain't Negroes and blacks, that they're Moors. But you can't bring up some fictional brand name as a nation and entertain international law. Stop lying. Get over it. Our people keep trying to be somebody that they're not, and then trying to get the protections of international law on a platform of which they're not a party. You can't use a brand and argue legitimate law. It doesn't happen. Or in the principle of law, they say a slave can't own property. And therefore, a slave not owning property can't claim the liberties or the rights or the inheritances that go with said property. Less more, even owning self.
I went to, I recently looked at a video that showed proof that there were Moors, were melanated men that owned slaves.
Yes.
So slave had nothing to do.
Exactly, it's a status.
And the slaves were of both, of multiple nationalities.
Let's put it, so slave is connotative.
Slavic.
Now, slave is actually Slovakian.
Right.
And it is a term that's contemporary in nature. It's not an ancient term. It is a contemporary, in its connotative form, it's a contemporary connotative form that is used and adopted from the operations of the subjugation of Slovakian people, hybrid Europeans in Northern Asia under Russian operations. And so the shortened term Slav or slave has been used for subjugation. Now, that's a nationality, or that's a general pedigree of some Europeans. Now, connotatively, the subjugation action was connotatively adopted in terms of oppressed people, and thus slave is used connotatively, not properly, but connotatively in what you would call suppressive operations, and in particular, suppressive operations under colonial operations connotatively of suppressing people of African descent. So African people of African descent, i.e. Canaanites, Moabites, known as Moors, have been designated connotatively, operationally, under the term slave, but they in fact were not slave, they were bound free men. Slave is actually the hybrid European Slovakian nations, Czechoslovakia, etc. And that's fact. So we must also be clear that when certain terms are used, we must be clear between connotative presentment, distinguished from, in fact, the true etymological meanings and histories of certain words. And so you'll see a lot of times people or writers or scholars will take the connotative use of the word slave and place it in a time period in more earlier times, when in fact that is a false position, because it was not used connotatively in earlier forms prior to the Russian occupation of the Slovakian nation areas. That's a fact. It's sort of like people get used to scholars or people claiming to be scholars throwing the word slave around and then putting it back into a period of history when it did not exist in its connotative form. That's sort of like people wanting to have a discussion today about whether George Washington, the ninth president for the United States, whether he used an iPhone or iPhone 10 or iPhone 11 or Samsung. It's like having that kind of argument. It's irrelevant. Most likely he didn't have a cell phone at all. Not that that technology didn't exist even prior to him. We're just saying in relationship to their real operations. He probably didn't have an iPhone. And that's the same thing talking about slavery in ancient times.
I want to read a comment from Malik Imhotep Bata El Bey. So the prophet prophesied that I'm going to leave the European here just long enough to teach you how to run a government. I bought you everything it takes to save a nation. Now take it and save yourself.
Exactly.
Each soul is accountable for its actions. Understanding yourself as master and servant of your own government will remove from thee the cares and solicitudes in life, national divine movement in the mind, which goes in line with the quote or that I shared with you.
Yes.
That knowing yourself and
is
where
important.
you really are the two most important issues that you should be involved with. It is your task to find out.
Exactly.
In fact, if someone, and this is what kind of drove this particular topic, because so many people want someone to give them A, B, C, D,
and they must become a part to it.
But it said it is your task to find out. In fact, if someone gave you the correct answers, it would not mean a thing to you, for they would not be attached to you in a way that
exactly.
it would if you would have found them yourself.
And this is where Drew Ali had said, if I told you everything, he said, the half has not been told. If I told you everything, you would go back to sleep. Study yourselves.
Right.
You know, and keep in mind, a lot of times, and this has been our experience over the years, and very often we have this discussion where people come to a forum like this and they expect you to give them a red pill or a blue pill outside of knowledge, if you get the point, or to rescue them, or we got a headache, give us an aspirin. They're stealing our rights, give us a pill. Make a statement so I can go into a court, not even identifying that these places aren't courts, you know, and then having what you call these pill expectations, which is a wrong concept. And then you find people will become cognizant of some of these facts and want to cure overnight, but they have not been participating or active in their responsibility to themselves and their families in relationship to their status and in relationship to absorbing this information and expanding on it. But they want the benefit of it. The same way when you see a lot of people get cognizant of this information now, because we're already under attack. It doesn't just arrive. We're already under attack. And I know that you've experienced over this last decade and more, people coming into this forum, even at the House of Reawakening Minds, as I have, you know, experienced people coming into the roundtable venue for years. When the doo-doo hits the fan and the corporate operatives are openly abusing them, you know, it's not subtle. Then they come to start a process of learning and want to know this overnight when they really haven't been participating. And you can give them certain answers. And it's not absorbed in them because it's not a party. They're not a party to it. So it is not a party to them. Not that it doesn't belong to them. And then there's the lack of knowing and lack of understanding and the false expectations. Whereas they are not aware that these so-called administrative executives who have been claiming to be judges are Masons, Knights Templars, Skull and Bones, Knights of Columbus, and know already that these people are Moors. And when these people come before them making arguments, they can easily tell whether these people have been studying or not. You know, like when, you know, it's sort of like they keep assuming that the hybrid Europeans don't know who they are. Many people keep assuming that the hybrid European forgot that he's a colonist, and that because he claims to be an American, that he's convinced that he's American, and you're supposed to be convinced that he's American, and he operates from that perspective. And then when you hold him or her to their obligations to the treaties and the Constitution, all of a sudden they get scramble-minded and start acting like they don't know what you're talking about, or you don't know what you're talking about. But the real deal is they know that if you knew constitutional principles, you wouldn't be in that venue. And that you would, if you were forced into that venue, that you would challenge the jurisdiction with an averment of jurisdiction, or quo warranto, and command his obligation to the treaty, and it would automatically revert to a consular court via what Dwight D. Eisenhower suspended in 1954 when they introduced their 32 and 33 degree Mason civil rights marching guys and girls to deceive the people into the 14th Amendment fraud instead of telling them the proper venue was consular court that he suspended. Oh, nobody wants to go there, do they?
Which probably leads into Bantu Mandika's question of, so why haven't the Moors brought the government up on charges? The de facto government, I would say.
They have been on many fronts, but mostly we've been pretty much blocked from international venues, and we've been most of the time challenging their jurisdiction into in the private for-profit human trafficking municipal venues, most of which we have been forced into, etc. However, most of the people, when they're making that statement, must also recognize that they themselves, while asking that question, are responsible to this along with us, and should have been with us and other active Moors in that support, because that's a necessary fact, which is also why over the years we've been struggling to get our people cognizant of their true identity and status and their obligation to be involved into the divine and more national movement on the planet. I think too often they're looking for other people to be sacrificial lamb. This is part of the training, and do the work, and then they step on board and get the benefit after the fact, rather than jumping on board, because it's their responsibility too. I think this also comes from the misconception where people are looking at the Moorish movement as an idea of, or some club, or some people that are conscious, as opposed to being their responsibility. It's in their inheritance, their pedigree, their bloodline too. And I think this is also problematic, where many conscious Moors have been teaching or presenting the nationality as a religion, distinguished from the fact that that's a pedigree, and they also have an obligation to inheritances and to treaties that have not been exercised, which is what they see taking place. And that is their duty and responsibility to get on board and help. Don't look at the wagon, people struggling to push the wagon, get behind and push this wagon too, because it's yours too. It's your birthright. And a lot of people don't see it as their responsibility.
But when you think in terms of the fact that we're under occupation and have been for so long, it's as if in this time someone totally unknown to you or unrelated to you would just walk into where you domicile and take up residence and start to order you around and legislate how things are.
This is what they've been doing.
And take your stuff.
That's exactly what they've been doing. Now, exactly what you're saying. Now look at this. This is one to show the people, to demonstrate just what you're saying. This is why we talk to people to get an idea of what your position should be in the political forum. We remind people to read the Organic Act of Congress, 1871, February 2nd. We also recommend them to do the research on the Woodrow Wilson administration, excerpt 1913. Then we also represent to them to read House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session June the 5th of 1933. And it becomes very obvious what the politics are really, that's really operating on the land is. And also to study intently the word and the application of hypothecation. And also in recognizing the operation of the skull and bone operators of the Circle Church and the Chancery via Franklin Delano Roosevelt with pledging the birth certificates as bonds to refund the again bankrupted U.S. corporation operations, United States, etc. And this would pretty much become obvious to everyone, the politics. And what I recognize that while we've been sharing this information with people for 40 years or more, that people keep looking at it as our information or like our ideas rather than this is established fact. And this is where your economic and political problems have their origin, yours as well as ours. It's not ours that we're informing you of. It is all of our problems, economic and political, that we've been suffering from, and then calling it other things falsely like racism and prejudice when you're actually under occupation. You're suffering under the doctrine of discovery and unum sanctum operations. That's the fact. Take responsibility and help get this work done. Because remember, their position is, if you don't declare a right, from their position, although it's immoral and unethical, they hold truthfully, openly, and by policy. Any rights not claimed by the people are abandoned, and they claim them as fiduciaries. And so not only do they use birth certificates to fund by bonds the United States Corporation Company, but also all marriage certificates and all licenses and CDLs, etc., are bonded and sold as derivatives on the world market. This is part of what has frozen up now. And the nations of the earth are no longer buying them. They tried, as a matter of fact, they tried, I think a couple of years ago, just before Trump came in, to refund the United States again, I think around 2013, when the Pope Francis did, as many of you who have been keeping up with what we've been sharing with you over the years, the motu proprio issued by Pope Francis in 2013 when the United States went bankrupt again, and they told them they weren't going to buy any more of their bonds that were leaned against the people's birth certificates. This is another reason why no one wants to talk about the crash that took place in late 2007 and 2008 is subsistent to what is going on right now. They never fixed it. That's the fact. And it's just that the credit windows and the trade windows of the world have frozen up. And the other fact, Donald J. Trump is using the Zionist order of the Federal Reserve according to their operations, and it was absorbed into the IMF, i.e. the U.S. Treasury, which is actually the International Monetary Fund, and he's issuing the debt against the banks. That's why they don't like him, because he's using their very stuff against them.
Is he also trying to preserve some pensions?
Oh, because it would see, this is what would happen. And again, I don't want you all to get this twisted. I'm not defending Donald Trump. If Donald Trump hadn't been using the Jesuit or Zionist order operation of the banks, their own system against themselves, many of you who had pensions would not be receiving any pension checks right now today. Now, that's the truth, even though it's still colored. And if you notice that the stock market is going up, but jobs is going down, it also clearly shows you there's no correlation whatsoever. But when they talk to the people, they talk to the people as if the stock market is a representation of the gross national product and of the economic operations on the land. The operations of the stock market constantly going up, drops a little bit and then goes back up, drops a little bit and goes back up. Then gold and silver goes down, etc. And the people don't notice that there's no correlation, that the entire situation, the operations of their economic system is totally, absolutely manipulated. and that the stock market and the employment, etc., has no relationship whatsoever. Also notice that all of your major corporations, i.e. sort of like the Gates Foundation and other foundations, have exponentially generated billions of dollars in these last few